Couldn't afford a black dress? Or are you just desperate for attention? My sister's voice echoed across the cemetery, sharp enough to cut through the heavy silence of our father's funeral. She scoffed, pointing a manicured finger at my military dress uniform, while a few distant relatives actually giggled behind their hands. To them, I was just the black sheep who had run away to join the army, while my sister had married into millions. She stood there, dripping in designer diamonds, completely convinced she had won the ultimate sibling rivalry. She thought she was humiliating me in front of everyone, but the smug smile completely died on her face when her arrogant husband, a major defense contractor trying to land a government deal, finally looked up, locked eyes with me, and turned entirely pale. He dropped his glass, stuttering in pure panic. Ma'am, you're the colonel? Follow my story until the end to see how the tables turned. My name is Sarah, and at 34 years old, I was stepping back into my hometown for the first time in over a decade. The air in the small suburban church felt thick, heavy with the scent of lilies and old family resentments. Growing up, I was always considered the black sheep of the family, the rebellious daughter who didn't fit into our materialistic world. While my older sister Vanessa chased wealth, designer labels, and status, eventually marrying a multimillionaire corporate executive, I chose a completely different path. At 18, much to my family's horror and vocal disappointment, I packed a single bag and left home to join the military. They viewed my choice as a massive failure, a desperate move for someone who couldn't make it in the real world. Over the next 16 years, as they completely cut me off, I quietly rose through the ranks, enduring deployments, sleepless nights, and grueling leadership challenges. I never told them about my promotions because they simply didn't care. But when our father passed away, the only man who had ever truly believed in me, I knew I had to come back. I stood in the church lobby, adjusting the collar of my pristine formal military dress uniform. It was the highest sign of respect I could possibly show to honor my late father's memory. I was prepared for the grief, but I had absolutely no idea about the petty, arrogant trap my sister had already set for my arrival. As I walked into the main viewing room, the heavy silence of the chapel was broken by the sharp click of high heels on the marble floor. I turned to see my sister Vanessa gliding toward me, her eyes locked onto my attire. Instead of a greeting or a comforting embrace, a smug, mocking sneer spread across her face. In front of a large crowd of gathered relatives, she spoke up, her voice loud enough to carry across the entire room. Couldn't afford a black dress, Sarah? Or are you just that desperate for attention? The words echoed, and to my disgust, several of our distant aunts and cousins actually giggled behind their manicured hands, eager to stay in Vanessa's wealthy good graces. She stood there, dripping in designer diamonds, fully convinced she had won our lifelong sibling rivalry by publicly humiliating me. Vanessa continued her loud commentary, painting a false picture to the crowd that I was completely broke, a struggling soldier who couldn't even manage a proper dress for our own father's funeral. I stood perfectly still, my hands clasped firmly in front of me. Every ounce of my military training kept my posture stoic, and my expression completely blank. I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me tear up or lash out, but internally, a cold anger was settling deep into my chest. It wasn't just the petty insult to me, it was the absolute lack of respect she was showing to our father's memory, turning his final farewell into a stage for her shallow, arrogant games. Before I could even open my mouth to respond, Vanessa's husband, Richard, swaggered into the room. Richard was the epitome of arrogance, a wealthy defense contractor whose entire corporate empire relied heavily on securing massive, multi-million-dollar military supply chains. He held a glass of expensive scotch in one hand, completely exuding an aura of false superiority. Vanessa immediately grabbed his arm, eager to pull him into her cruel little game. She wanted her powerful, rich husband to definitively put me in my place in front of the entire family. "Look, honey," Vanessa said, her voice dripping with patronizing sarcasm as she gestured toward me. "My poor little soldier sister actually decided to show up. It looks like she forgot what a real funeral looks like." Richard initially didn't even bother to look up at my face or notice the specific insignia on my uniform. He was entirely preoccupied, his eyes glued to his phone screen as he tracked a massive, pending government contract his company was desperately trying to secure that week. He simply gave a dismissive, arrogant chuckle at his wife's malicious joke, completely looking down on me as if I were nothing more than an insignificant, low-ranking private. He had spent his entire career dealing with high-level officials, and in his mind, a female soldier at a small-town funeral wasn't even worth his time or attention. He stood there, fully supporting his wife's public bullying, entirely unaware of the absolute devastation that was about to hit his career. Richard finally looked up from his phone to look me in the eye, and his gaze casually fell upon my uniform. The smirk on his face instantly froze. His eyes widened, completely locking onto the highly decorated silver eagles pinned to my shoulders and the distinct elite unit patches stitched onto my sleeve. I watched as the color rapidly drained from his face, leaving him completely pale in the middle of the crowded room. He recognized the unmistakable insignia of the 132nd Logistics and Procurement Command. It was the exact federal division that held absolute veto power over his company's pending multi-million-dollar government supply contract. The phone in his hand trembled as the horrifying reality finally sank in. In a single, breathless second, Richard realized that the poor, broke, insignificant sister-in-law his wife had been loudly mocking and bullying in public was not a low-ranking soldier at all. I was the newly appointed base commander of the entire region. I was the high-ranking official who held his company's entire financial future, his wealth, and his reputation completely in my hands. Vanessa, completely oblivious to her husband's sudden terror, nudged his arm, encouraging him to say something else cruel to me. But Richard couldn't even breathe. He stood there shivering in his expensive designer suit, staring at my medals like he was looking at a ghost. The ultimate power dynamic in our family had just shattered, and the sheer panic radiating off him was absolutely priceless. Richard panicked completely, sweat instantly breaking out across his forehead and soaking right through his expensive designer suit. Vanessa opened her mouth to deliver another petty insult, but Richard suddenly snapped, his voice sharp and terrified. "Shut up, Vanessa! Just shut your mouth right now!" The entire gathering of relatives instantly froze, the shallow giggling dying out as a wave of absolute confusion swept through the room. Vanessa stared at her husband in utter shock, her jaw dropping. Richard turned back to me, his hands shaking as he practically bowed, stuttering out in pure panic. Ma'am, I am so sorry. I didn't know the 132nd Commander was you." I shifted immediately into my commanding persona, my posture straightening as I looked down at him with cold, piercing authority. The quiet church lobby suddenly felt like my personal briefing room. "The military expects absolute integrity from the contractors we choose to partner with, Richard," I said, my voice calm but chillingly heavy. "And that integrity extends to how you conduct yourselves in your personal lives." Richard looked like he was about to faint right there on the marble floor. He knew exactly what those words meant. In trying to publicly humiliate me to satisfy his wife's superficial ego, they had just put their entire multi-million-dollar corporate empire on the chopping block. The relatives watched in stunned silence, finally realizing that the sister they had spent years looking down on was the most powerful person in the room. Following the service, the dynamic completely flipped. Vanessa, realizing the catastrophic mistake she had made, went from smug to utterly desperate. She and Richard cornered me near the exit, pleading for forgiveness. Vanessa tried to play the family card, falsely claiming her harsh words were just a joke. Richard practically begged me not to let this personal issue affect his company's pending contract review. I reminded them both of how they treated me when they thought I had no power, demonstrating how hollow their superficial wealth truly is. I stood by my father's grave one last time, watching the autumn leaves fall against the stone, knowing I had honored his memory with the dignity and respect he deserved. As for Vanessa and Richard, their desperate pleas changed nothing. Richard's company underwent a strict, completely unbiased federal review, and without any special favors to hide behind, their history of cutting corners and financial inflation was fully exposed. They lost the multi-million-dollar government contract, forcing a massive, brutal reality check on my entire family. They finally learned that true respect isn't bought with designer clothes or superficial wealth. Now, I'm curious about you who listened to my story. Have you ever had to deal with toxic, arrogant relatives who only respect people based on their status, job title, or how much money they have? How did you handle it? Drop your thoughts and experiences in the comments section below so we can talk about it. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other incredible stories from our channel favorites that will definitely surprise you. Thank you so much for watching until the very end.